You spent 3 days thinking about it. 3 days replaying a single moment, something you said at dinner, a post you almost didn't publish, a decision you made that felt right until you saw someone's face and suddenly it didn't feel right anymore. You didn't sleep well. You rehearsed better versions of yourself in the shower. You checked your phone more than you needed to, not because anything was there, but because something in you was waiting for a verdict that never came. We have all lived inside that loop. Every single one of us. The person who seems the most confident in the room has had nights exactly like yours. The most successful people you admire have stood in front of a mirror and second-guessed themselves because of what someone else might think. This is not a weakness you were born with. This is a pattern that was installed in you, and everything that gets installed can be uninstalled. Here is what that pattern is costing you. Not just your peace tonight, your life. The version of you that doesn't speak up in the meeting, doesn't start the business, doesn't say what you actually feel to the person you love. That version is not protecting you. It is shrinking you. And the longer it runs, the smaller the life it builds. But here is what I know. The people who learn to break free from the need for approval do not become cold or careless. They become clear. They become free. And that freedom, I am going to walk you through exactly how to find it. I want to speak to you honestly right now, before we go any further. If you pressed play on this audiobook, you already know something is off. You already sense that too much of your energy is going outward, toward managing perceptions, reading reactions, adjusting yourself to fit into spaces that were never really built for who you are. You feel it in the exhaustion that comes after social situations, in the way you edit your words before they leave your mouth, in the quiet disappointment of choosing safe over true, again and again and again. That is exactly where you need to be to receive what is in this audiobook. Not broken, not behind, exactly right. Here is what this audiobook is. It is a complete, honest, practical journey through one of the deepest forms of mental and emotional freedom a human being can experience. The ability to live from your own internal compass without being paralyzed by the opinions, judgments, or approval of others. By the time we reach the final chapter, you will understand where this need for approval actually comes from, why it has nothing to do with being weak, and precisely what to do the moment it rises up in your chest and tries to run your life. Here is what this audiobook is not. It is not a guide to becoming indifferent to everyone around you. It is not a manual for becoming someone who does not care about relationships, community, or the impact of their choices on other people. Caring about people is a strength. Needing their approval to function is the thing that has to go. Those are two entirely different things, and we are going to be very precise about that line throughout this journey. Here is the arc of where we are going. We start at the root, why the approval-seeking pattern exists and why it is not your fault. We move through the layers: identity, fear, social performance, perfectionism, and the stories you tell yourself about what others are thinking. And we arrive somewhere real. Not a version of you who is fearless, but a version of you who is free. Someone who can feel the discomfort of being misunderstood and keep moving anyway. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Invisible Cage. Why you care so much. Picture a child at the dinner table, around 7 or 8 years old. They say something funny and every adult in the room laughs, and something warm floods their chest. A feeling so good, so safe, so right, that the brain quietly files it. This is what belonging feels like. This is what I need to do to be okay. We all had that moment. Maybe it was laughter. Maybe it was praise. Maybe it was the relief of not being in trouble when you thought you were going to be. Whatever form it came in, we all learned very early that other people's reactions meant something about our safety. That is not a flaw in your character. That is the human nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do. Here is what I have come to understand. The need for approval is not vanity. It is survival code that was written into you before you had any say in the matter. The psychologist Abraham Maslow, who spent his career mapping what human beings need to thrive, placed belonging and esteem right at the center of his famous hierarchy of human needs, not at the bottom where food and shelter live, but in the middle where the deeper human hungers live. We are wired at a biological level to need to feel accepted by our tribe. For most of human history, rejection from the tribe was not just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. Consider Nelson Mandela, a man who spent 27 years in prison and came out not having collapsed under the weight of a world that had rejected, caged, and tried to silence him. In his own words, he described learning to understand the minds of his captors, not to please them, but because understanding what drives human fear and human judgment was the beginning of his own freedom from it. He did not stop caring by becoming numb. He stopped being controlled by it by understanding it. You were taught to read the room before you knew what you were doing. You learned to scan faces for approval the way other people learn to read traffic before crossing a street. Automatically, constantly, without thinking. And now it runs in the background of almost every decision you make. Here is what that looks like in your life today. You soften your real opinion before you say it. You check your post again before publishing. You agree with someone you do not agree with because the tension feels worse than the dishonesty. You decide not to try something because you have already imagined the look on someone's face if it doesn't work out. The practical tool for this chapter is simple, but it requires honesty. For the next 24 hours, every time you make a decision, even a small one, what to say, whether to post, whether to try something, ask yourself one question. Am I doing this because I want to, or because of what someone might think? You do not have to change anything yet. Just start noticing. Awareness is not passive. Awareness is the first move in every real transformation. Here is the truth you can carry from this chapter. You were not born afraid of judgment. You were taught to be, and everything that is taught can be unlearned. What I want you to think about next is this. If the fear was installed by the world around you, who exactly are you without it? That is the question that quietly waits in the chapter ahead. Chapter 2. The mirror that lies. Other people's opinions are not the truth. Think about the last time someone misread you. They assumed something about your motives, your character, your feelings, and they were completely wrong. Maybe they said it to your face. Maybe you heard it secondhand. But you knew, somewhere in your chest, that their version of you is not real. You knew. And yet, their version followed you around for days. We give other people's opinions a weight they have not earned. This is the quiet irony at the center of approval seeking. We hand the people whose perception of reality is most incomplete, the ones who have the least information about our inner life, our history, our actual intentions, an enormous amount of power over how we feel about ourselves. Here is what I want you to really sit with. Every opinion someone holds about you is filtered through their own wounds, their own experiences, their own unexamined fears. When someone judges you for being too loud, they are usually speaking from a place where they were once punished for taking up space. When someone decides you are arrogant for being confident, they are usually speaking from a place where confidence was modeled to them as a threat. Daniel Goleman, the researcher and author who brought the concept of emotional intelligence into the mainstream, spent years documenting how almost every harsh judgment a person makes about someone else is fundamentally a projection, an outward expression of something unresolved inside themselves. Consider Maya Angelou, one of the most beloved and celebrated writers and human beings of the 20th century. She once described spending years believing she was not good enough because someone told her she was too much, too bold, too loud, too big a presence for the room. And she said the day she understood that the person who told her that was speaking from their own smallness, not about her actual size, was the day she started becoming who she was always meant to be. In your own life, think about the opinions you have absorbed over the years and treated as fact. That you are too sensitive, too quiet, too ambitious, not ambitious enough, too emotional, too cold. Where did those come from? Who said them? And more importantly, what were they going through at the time? What were they afraid of? Here is the practical tool for this chapter. The next time someone's opinion of you lands hard and starts to settle, take out a piece of paper or open a notes app and write down 3 things. Who said it, what they might have been carrying at the time they said it, and whether this opinion is actually about you or about them. This is not about dismissing feedback. Some feedback is genuinely useful. This is about giving yourself the habit of examining the source before you absorb the content. Not every opinion deserves to live rent-free in your mind. You are not the sum of other people's perceptions. You never were. And here is what that opens up. If you are not who they say you are, then who are you? That question is not frightening. That question is the beginning of freedom. Chapter 3. The story in your head. The imaginary audience. Imagine you are about to send an important message, a pitch, a vulnerable text, a creative thing you made, and before you send it, you spend 20 minutes rewriting it. Not because the words were wrong, because you are writing it for an imaginary version of the person who would receive it. A version you constructed entirely from assumption, anxiety, and projection. We do this constantly. Social psychologists have a name for it, the imaginary audience. The idea, first developed by researcher David Elkind in studies of adolescent thinking, is that most of us carry around a mental audience watching our every move, reacting to our every choice, judging our every step. The teenage version of this is obvious and intense, but the adult version never fully leaves. It just gets more sophisticated and quieter. Here is what I have observed. The imaginary audience is almost always more critical than the real one. The version of your colleagues that lives in your head is harsher than the real people sitting at their desks thinking about their own lives, their own problems, their own imaginary audiences. The version of your family that runs in your anxious mind has an opinion on everything. The real ones are probably too distracted to have thought about it at all. Consider Abraham Lincoln, perhaps the most criticized leader in American political history. During his presidency, he was mocked in the press almost daily. Cartoons, editorial columns, public speeches by his opponents painted him as incompetent, as ugly, as unworthy of the office. Lincoln once said that if he worried about what every newspaper said about him, he would not have time to govern. What he practiced, almost as a discipline, was the ability to separate the noise of public opinion from the clarity of his own sense of direction. He was not indifferent to people. He was selective about which voices he allowed to inform him. In your daily life, the imaginary audience shows up every time you do not post something you made because you're already imagining the comments. It shows up when you stay quiet in a meeting running a worst-case scenario about how people would react if you spoke. It shows up when you rehearse conversations that have not happened yet and pre-build your defense. Here is the tool that changes this. The next time you catch yourself imagining how someone will react to something you want to do, stop and ask a single question. Is this person actually watching? In most cases, the honest answer is no. They are not watching. They are not thinking about you. They are inside their own story, dealing with their own version of this exact chapter. Name the imaginary audience out loud. Say, "This is not a real reaction. This is a story I built." And then decide what you would do if no one were watching at all. Here is what I know after watching people work through this. When you stop performing for an audience that doesn't exist, an enormous amount of energy comes back to you. Energy you didn't even know was gone. Before we move on, I want to ask you something. Drop your answer in the comments right now. What is one thing you have been holding back because of what someone in your imaginary audience might think? I read every comment, and your answer might shape the next audiobook we create together. The audience is smaller than you think, but the person who is always watching, always present, always keeping score, we're going to talk about them in the chapter ahead. Chapter 4, The Inner Critic, the harshest voice in the room. There is a voice that has been with you longer than any relationship you have ever had. It was there the first time you failed a test. It was there when you said the wrong thing and replayed it all night. It was there this morning. It is the voice that edits you before you speak, that grades you after every interaction, that measures every version of you against some unclear, unreachable standard and finds you short. Most of us spend so much energy managing what other people think of us that we forget the loudest, most relentless critic in our life is not external at all. It lives inside the same skull as our dreams. Here is what I have come to understand about the inner critic. It is not evil. It is not trying to destroy you. It is a misguided protector, a part of your psychology that at some point decided the best way to keep you safe from external criticism was to criticize you first. If you reject yourself before the world rejects you, the theory goes, it will hurt less. The problem is that this strategy has never once worked. It just adds a second voice of rejection to the one you were already afraid of. Kristen Neff, a researcher at the University of Texas who has spent her career studying self-compassion, found in study after study that people who speak to themselves with the same warmth and understanding they would give a close friend are not weaker or more complacent. They are significantly more resilient, more motivated, and more capable of handling genuine failure than those who maintain a harsh inner critic as their default mode. Self-compassion, Neff found, is not self-indulgence. It is the foundation of a stable identity that does not need constant external validation to feel solid. Consider Oprah Winfrey, who built one of the most influential media empires in history, and who has spoken openly about years of deeply internalized self-criticism rooted in a childhood where her worth was measured against other people's expectations of her. She described a turning point, not when the critic disappeared, but when she stopped giving it the seat at the head of a table. When she started treating herself the way she would treat a guest on her own show, with genuine curiosity and genuine kindness. In your life, the inner critic sounds like, "That was stupid. You should have known better. Why do you always do this? Everyone could see how nervous you were. You're too much. You're not enough." You notice it most in the quiet moments, the ones after a conversation ends, after you try something new, after you take any kind of risk at all. Here is the tool. When the inner critic speaks, and it will, possibly within the hour, respond to it the way you would respond to a friend who just said those things to you out loud. Would you agree? Would you argue back? You would probably say, "That is not true." Let's look at this more clearly. Start treating your inner voice with the same standards you hold your outer relationships to. You would not allow a friend to speak to you that way for long. The same rule now applies inside. You are not the voice that criticizes you. You are the one who can choose whether to believe it. Chapter 5, Roots and Reasons, where the need for approval was born. Think back to a moment in childhood when you did something, drew a picture, sang a song, made a joke, shared an idea, and the response you got was not what you needed. Maybe the room went quiet. Maybe someone laughed in the wrong way. Maybe no one noticed at all. And something in you decided in that moment to be more careful next time. Approval seeking does not appear fully formed in adulthood. It is always built on something earlier. And understanding what it was built on is one of the most powerful things you can do. Not because the past excuses the present, but because seeing the origin point of a pattern gives you the power to stop running from something you've never actually looked at directly. Here is what I have come to understand. Much of our need for external validation is rooted in what psychologists call attachment, the early relational patterns we formed with the people who raised us. John Bowlby, the British psychiatrist who first developed attachment theory and whose work still shapes how we understand human relationships today, found that children who grew up in environments where love and approval felt conditional, where affection came and went depending on behavior, performance, or mood, learned to regulate their entire sense of self-worth through the reactions of others. It was not manipulation. It was adaptation. It was a child doing the smartest possible thing with the information they had. Consider Viktor Frankl, the Austrian psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor whose insights on meaning, suffering, and human freedom remain among the most profound of the 20th century. Frankl wrote that between stimulus and response there is a space, and in that space lies our freedom and our growth. He arrived at that insight having survived conditions designed to strip every human being of identity, dignity, and the ability to self-determine. What he found was that the one thing no external force could ever fully take was the internal choice of response. The roots of his identity were not in what the world gave back to him. They were in something no one outside him had ever planted. In your life, the roots look different for each person. For some, it was a parent who praised performance and withdrew when you failed. For some, it was a school environment where being different meant being a target. For some, it was a relationship that rewarded you for being small and punished you for taking up space. You do not need to excavate every detail, but you do need to know this did not start with you. You built a strategy to survive a specific environment. You are allowed to examine whether that strategy still fits the life you are living now. Here is the tool for this chapter. Take 10 minutes today, not to analyze your entire childhood, but to identify one early pattern. Think of one specific type of situation where you consistently shrink, over-explain, or seek reassurance, and ask yourself, where did I first learn that this situation was dangerous? You are not trying to assign blame. You are trying to find the specific moment where the cage door closed, because that is the first step toward opening it. Your past explains you. It does not define you. And it certainly does not decide your future. Chapter 6, Approval at Work. How People-Pleasing Costs You Your Career. Picture yourself in a meeting. Someone proposes something you genuinely disagree with, not just a preference, but something you believe will not work. You know why. You have thought it through, and you say nothing. Or you say something carefully wrapped in so many qualifications that by the time you finish, you have agreed with the thing you came in disagreeing with. Later, driving home, you replay it. You know exactly what you should have said. And you wonder, not for the first time, what it is costing you. Here is what I want to be direct about. In professional environments, people-pleasing masquerades as professionalism. It looks like collaboration. It sounds like flexibility. But over time, the person who never disagrees, never challenges, never stands firm on an inconvenient truth becomes invisible in a different way. Not disliked, but not taken seriously. Not a voice that shapes decisions. Not someone whose presence changes the room. Stephen Covey, the author who transformed how millions of people think about effectiveness and leadership, drew a sharp distinction between people who operated from a core of principles and people who operated from a core of social approval. His insight was that the most effective human beings were not the most agreeable ones, they were the most trustworthy ones. And trustworthiness, he argued, requires the willingness to say things that are uncomfortable when they are true. The agreement seeker and the truth teller are not the same person, and over time, organizations know the difference. Consider Warren Buffett, who has described his decision-making process as entirely internal, built around a simple question he returns to constantly. Would I be comfortable if the person I admire most could see exactly what I am doing and why? Not the crowd, not the market consensus. One specific, imagined figure of integrity. He is not performing for approval. He is accountable to a standard. That distinction is everything. In your work life, people-pleasing shows up when you take on work you do not have capacity for because you cannot stand the discomfort of saying no. It shows up when you let a colleague take credit for something you built because the confrontation feels worse than the injustice. It shows up in the email you spend an hour softening until the actual point disappears. Here is the tool. The next time you are about to agree with something you genuinely disagree with at work, give yourself a 6-second pause before you speak. In that 6 seconds, ask, if I say nothing, who carries the cost of this decision? Usually the answer is you. Sometimes the answer is your team, your project, your client. The discomfort of speaking up lasts about 30 seconds. The cost of staying silent can last months. Your voice at work is not just a career asset. It is part of your identity. And every time you silence it for the sake of approval, a small piece of that identity gets quieter. If what you are hearing is already shifting something inside you, subscribe to this channel right now and hit the notification bell, because the next audiobook goes even deeper into the power of self-discipline and how to build the kind of inner strength that approval can never replace. You do not want to miss it. How we handle approval at work is one arena, but there is another arena where the stakes feel even higher, one where the fear of judgment runs deepest and hits closest. That is the one we are stepping into next. Chapter 7. The Relationship Trap. When love becomes performance. Think about the last time you edited yourself for someone you love. Not a stranger, not a colleague. Someone whose presence in your life actually matters to you. You did not say the real thing. You said the safe thing. And the real thing sat quietly in your chest, waiting. Intimate relationships, romantic partnerships, close friendships, family connections are the places where the need for approval runs deepest because the stakes feel highest. These are the people whose rejection would actually hurt. So we make ourselves smaller, softer, easier to handle. We perform a version of ourselves designed to keep the peace, to stay chosen, to avoid the conversation that might end things. Here is the painful irony. The performance that is meant to protect the relationship is often the thing that hollows it out. When you are not real with someone, they do not get to love the real you. They get to love the performance. And somewhere underneath, you know it. And that knowledge, that you are loved for who you are pretending to be rather than who you actually are, is one of the loneliest feelings a human being can carry. Brené Brown, the researcher and author whose work on vulnerability and human connection has reached tens of millions of people worldwide, found something in her research that changed the way I think about this entirely. She found that the people who reported the deepest, most satisfying connections in their lives were not the ones who had found the perfect partner or the perfect friendship. They were the ones who were willing to be seen, really seen, including the parts they were afraid were too much, too strange, or too difficult. The connection she found was not built on compatibility. It was built on courage. Think about a relationship in your own life, one where you feel like you can be completely, unreservedly yourself. Notice how that relationship feels in your body. Notice the absence of that low-grade performance anxiety that lives in other relationships. That ease is not luck. It is the product of two people who decided being real was worth the risk of being seen. In your relationships right now, the approval trap shows up when you agree with how a partner describes you even when it does not feel true. When you do not tell a friend something important because you need them to keep seeing you a certain way. When you perform happiness, strength, or certainty because you are afraid that the real version, the uncertain, struggling, sometimes confused real version, will be too much for the people you need. Here is the tool. Choose one relationship, one person in your life you trust, and this week say one true thing to them that you would normally edit. Not a confrontation, not a dramatic reveal. One honest thing. Notice what happens. In most cases, the real thing is met with more warmth than the safe version ever was. Because people do not connect with performances. They connect with people. The most loving thing you can offer someone is your real self, not the version you think they want. Chapter 8. The Freedom Practice. How to stop seeking approval in real time. Imagine you just did something bold. You said the true thing. You posted the work. You declined the request that was never yours to carry. And the old familiar feeling starts: the scan, the wait, the monitoring of reactions. The need to know if it landed right. Breaking free from approval seeking is not a destination you arrive at once. It is a practice. It is something you do in real time, in the moments when the need rises up and asks to run your decisions. Understanding it conceptually is only the beginning. The real work happens in the moment, when you are standing at the edge of an authentic choice and the old pattern is pulling you back. Here is what I have come to understand about the mechanism of real-time freedom. The need for approval is essentially a question the nervous system is asking. Am I safe? The answer it is looking for comes from inside, not outside. The practice is learning to answer that question yourself before the external response has a chance to do it for you. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher who wrote privately in his journals without ever intending to publish them, journals that became one of the most read philosophical texts in history, returned again and again to one central discipline: the separation of what is within our control from what is not. Specifically, he wrote that the opinions of others are entirely beyond our control, and that spending energy trying to manage what is beyond our control is not strength. It is a form of suffering that we choose and then call necessity. The Stoic practice he cultivated was not indifference to the world. It was a deep, practiced clarity about the boundary between self and opinion. In your real life, the practice has 3 movements. The first is the pause, the moment between the impulse to seek approval and the action. You already know this pause from earlier chapters. Here you deepen it. The second movement is the anchor, returning to your own clear sense of what you actually think, actually feel, actually want, before you look outward for confirmation. The third movement is the release, letting the reaction come, whatever it is, without treating it as a verdict. Letting people have their response while you hold your own. Here is the specific tool for this chapter, a 3-word internal question you can use in any moment when the approval-seeking impulse rises. What do I know? Not what will they think. Not what will happen. What do you know about yourself, your intentions, your choices this moment? 3 words that pull you back to your own center before the old pattern can take over. Practice it today. Say it when something you did gets an unexpected reaction. Say it when someone's silence feels like judgment. What do I know? Let the answer come from inside. The practice is not perfect. There will be days the pattern wins. That is not failure. That is how practice works. Chapter 9. Identity over opinion. Building the self that does not need to be approved. There is a version of you that doesn't need the room to respond in a certain way. That posts without waiting for the likes to start. That says what is true without rehearsing the reaction first. That makes decisions from a clear internal compass instead of an anxious external scan. That version of you is not a fantasy. It is not someone else's personality. It is the self that exists underneath the approval-seeking, the identity that was there before the world taught you to monitor yourself so closely. And the work of this chapter, and in many ways, the work of this entire audiobook, is to reconnect you with that self so completely that external opinion becomes information rather than verdict. Here is what I have come to understand about identity. When a person has a stable, clearly defined sense of who they are, their values, their standards, their non-negotiables, external opinions slide off differently. Not because they stop feeling them, but because they have an internal reference point that is more real, more solid, and more trustworthy than the shifting reactions of the people around them. The psychologist Carl Rogers, whose work on self-concept and unconditional positive regard transformed modern therapy, spent his career arguing that the self that is most stable is not the self that is praised the most. It is the self that is most genuinely known. To yourself, without performance, without apology. Consider Brené Brown again, here, not just as a researcher, but as a person who spent years working through her own deep discomfort with being seen as imperfect. In her own work and in her own life, she arrived at what she called her integrity list, a short list of the 2 or 3 values that were so central to who she was that violating them felt like self-betrayal. When decisions were hard, she returned to the list, not to what the world would think, to what those values required of her. That list was her identity in portable form. In your life today, the path to a self that does not need constant external approval begins with a simple but demanding question. What do I actually believe? Not what were you told to believe. Not what earns you the most approval in the rooms you frequent. What do you know to be true about people, about what matters, about how you want to move through the world? The clearer your answer to that question, the less power any external opinion has to destabilize you. Here is the tool for this chapter. Take 15 minutes and write down 3 things. 1 value that you hold that you would not abandon even if everyone around you disagreed with it. 1 thing you believe about yourself that is true regardless of whether anyone else sees it. And 1 standard of behavior, 1 way of treating people or conducting yourself that you consider non-negotiable. This is the beginning of your identity document, not for anyone else to read, for you to return to when the noise gets loud. You do not need the world to see you clearly. You need to see yourself clearly. That is the foundation. Everything else is weather. If this audiobook is adding real value to your life, do not keep it to yourself. Share it with 1 person who needs to hear this today. You might not realize it, but that 1 share could genuinely change someone's life. You have done the real work now. What comes next is not another concept. It is the landing. Chapter 10, The Closing Truth, Free. Do you remember where we started? 3 days. Replaying a moment. Checking a phone for a verdict that never came. Lying awake constructing better versions of yourself for a jury that had already moved on to their own worries. Come back to that person for just a moment. Not with judgment. With something closer to recognition. Because that person was not broken. They were doing something very human, trying to feel safe in a world that taught them safety came from outside. They were carrying a strategy that was once smart, that once served a real purpose, and that had simply outlived its usefulness. Look at what we have walked through together. We began at the root, in the biology and the early learning that wired approval seeking into you before you had any choice. We moved through the lies, the imaginary audience, the inner critic, the mirror that distorts. We traced the pattern through your work, through your relationships, through the real moments where it costs you most. We gave you the tools, not inspirational ideas, but practices, specific and immediate, that you can use the moment the old pull returns. And we arrived here at the question of identity itself, at the understanding that the self which does not need constant approval is not a self that cares less. It is a self that is finally, genuinely grounded. Here is what I want to acknowledge honestly. This journey is not linear. There will be weeks when the old pattern comes back with force, when someone's reaction to something you did will hit harder than you expected, when the approval-seeking loop will run again, and you will catch yourself 3 days into it before you even noticed it started. That is not failure. That is not evidence that none of this worked. That is what changing deep patterns actually looks like. Not a clean, straight line from old to new, but a spiral, where you keep returning to the same territory from a slightly higher vantage point each time. Each time, you will catch it faster. Each time, the grip will be a little lighter. Here are the principles to carry with you. You are not who they think you are who you know yourself to be. Other people's opinions are not data about you, they are data about them. The life you are building is too important to be designed by committee. Approval is a wave. You can feel it without letting it steer. And this above all, the most dangerous approval you can spend your life chasing is the kind that was never yours to earn. Picture who you are becoming. You are not fearless. That was never the goal. You are someone who feels the discomfort of being misunderstood and moves anyway. You are someone who posts the work and then goes back to the work, instead of watching the numbers. You are someone who says the true thing in the meeting and lives with the silence that sometimes follows, because you know that silence is not judgment, it is other people catching up to what you already know. You are someone whose relationships feel different now, more real, more reciprocal, more nourishing, because the people in them are meeting the actual you. You are someone who checks in with yourself before checking in with the room. Someone whose internal compass is louder than the noise outside. That person is not a distant goal. That person is you, already in the process of arriving. Here is the truth I want to leave you with. Freedom from the need for approval is not the absence of caring about others. It is the presence of caring about yourself. Clearly enough, consistently enough, honestly enough that the outside world becomes a place you move through with intention, rather than a place that moves you. You were never meant to be shaped by every passing opinion. You were meant to be shaped by your own deepest truth. That is not selfishness. That is how a full, real, singular human life gets lived. If this audiobook gave you something real, subscribe to this channel and stay on this journey with me. The next audiobook goes even deeper into the power of self-discipline, how to build the inner strength to do what you must even when the world around you gives you every reason to stop. Share this with someone who needs it today. And until next time, keep growing, keep choosing, keep becoming.